All right, it
Uh,
is 1 o'clock.
okay.
So why don't we start? We've got attendees in the room. Thank you all for joining, and we'll try to catch some people up very briefly if, in fact, they kind of join a little bit late. But today's webinar, one in a series that we've been running since April 4th through, I think, mid-October, actually, is recovering from a cyber attack. And uh, on this call, my name is Chris Yule. I'm the VP of Sales and Strategy. Oscar Jones is our CISO, leads all of our CISO and delivery team, and I'll introduce him more as we go on. Oscar, if you can go to the next slide. What we're really going to focus on in this session is what you're seeing on the screen. And go back one. And the reason I'm kind of putting this precursor, one of the things that really comes before the immediate response and something's going on, and which we're going to talk about, is the need, which we could have spent a whole nother session on, and we have in a bunch of different phases if you cobble them together, on actually knowing your current state. So everything almost starts out with an assessment. We have done everything from cyber risk assessments to actually find out how capable your organization is to protect itself from an attack, and if breached, how capable it is to recover. That is a huge starting point, as is your policies, your run books, and if you do or don't have cyber insurance. So we're leaving all of that out of this conversation and kind of picking it up from the point of how you would recover if, in fact, you are there. So if anybody wants to have a conversation about the precursor to this, happy to do that. But what we're going to really focus on is what you see there is really navigating the aftermath of a security breach. Next slide, Oscar. So Oscar Jones is our CISO, as I mentioned. He is an avid Cowboys fan. But one of the things that I think is that you'll gain from this conversation is the amount of knowledge that Oscar has throughout the entire process of cybersecurity and specifically within this whole breach moment. This comes with a tremendous amount of experience, a tremendous amount of patience and empathy, and understanding the fact that if any of you have had the sad moment to be a part of this, it's a super stressful time. And as part of what we do in our practice, we have an incident response practice within the organization, and we get inquiries on most Sundays of someone being breached and in complete duress. Oh, no different than someone having a car accident and calling their parents going, I don't know what to do. And that's how our Sundays are typically. So, Oscar, thank you for taking the time. I will be chiming in as well, but if you could take it from here, I'd really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. So good afternoon, everyone. As Chris stated, I am an avid Cowboys fan. I don't know if everyone else is on the call, but you get bonuses if you are a Cowboys fan. Like one extra page of information. No, we don't do that, but I wish we could. Chris hadn't signed off on it yet. But here we like to have fun. We like to talk about serious subjects. And I'm just very glad that everyone was able to take time out of their busy day to have a conversation with us as we talk about, what do you do next? And so let's get into it real quick here. Notable cyber attack cases. So Arden Health Services, November 2023. I'm not sure if everyone remembers this, but it was a ransomware attack forced network shutdown. Operations disrupted across 3 states. Critical care delays during emergency. Most likely they had to hope that Epic was able to help them along the process. But what we found was that it demonstrated the life-threatening potential of attacks on healthcare infrastructure. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I can honestly tell you that most hospitals, most healthcare companies are always behind the curve when it comes to preparing for a ransomware attack. They're just not ready. They don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the resources to do it. It's happened so many times before. And if you've been on any of these calls, we talked about some of these events. If you remember Change Healthcare about a year and a half, 2 years ago, that was catastrophic. It's still costing the money for almost now to $2 billion that they've had to spend. And not so much as just them having to spend that amount of money, their reputation is in tatters because now if I'm a customer, I'm not going to trust you because you already lost my data. Someone was able to come in and steal the information and sell it on the dark web. How do you fix that? And you can't really fix a reputation. Some people kind of repair it, and then people are still wary. If you think about Target and what happened to them a few years ago, and that wasn't even a cyber attack. It was just a physical issue that occurred with several different machines. So it happens to the best of us, no matter how much money you make, no matter how large you are. There are instances where no matter what you do, they will still find you and they'll still try to take you down. So American Express, March 2024, third-party merchant processor breach, names, card numbers, and expiration dates, vulnerability in the vendor security. I don't trust third-party vendors. No one should ever trust a third-party vendor. And if you are a third-party vendor and you're on this call, you've got to think about who you're connecting to, what kind of information you're protecting for them. You've got to make sure that you're doing your best because, and that's the problem. We're not just talking about the insurance portion of it. That's the easy part. But what do you do as far as a framework, or if you don't have the money and the time for a framework, how do you protect the data for your third-party vendors or individuals that are connecting into your environment because you're a third-party vendor? And then for Schneider Electric in January 2024, Cactus ransomware attack, 1.5 terabits from the sustainability division. Their clients, Walmart, PepsiCo, DHL. So do you think that they are still a vendor of those three large companies? They are not. Schneider was dropped by each one of those companies because of the amount of data that was stolen. And now, if a third-party vendor can't trust you, they're not going to have you as a client. And so that's what happened to them. They lost millions of dollars, and hopefully they learned something in the process of everything and how it happened. So here's the current threat landscape. Cyber attacks are not abstract. Real world events with significant consequences. So here's the new normal. Today's digital landscape question is not if an organization will face a cyber attack, but when. And with the prevalence of AI, I can guarantee you will not go a 24-hour time period in your life today without hearing AI. And AI has been around for quite some time, but it's become really prevalent. But if you think back to the early 90s, cloud computing then became, really a hot button. Everybody wanted cloud computing, and they've been doing it now for almost 30 years, but it had been around years before that. It's just that everyone else is finally catching up to it. So you've got to worry about things that are happening, things that haven't happened, but things that will most likely happen. And this covers all of them because, if you think about how they get in, what they do once they get in, can they cause a widespread disruption of a financial loss and reputational damage, which we stated earlier, but they also have a destructive impact. They can take away your business almost overnight. You can't do anything. You can't process information. That is what threat actors want to do. They want to make you panic. But here's the thing. If you are prepared for any of the events that are going to happen, and we know they're going to happen in the future, if you're preparing for them today, it'll be less of a headache tomorrow. So think about supply chain risk, third-party compromise as seen as in the American Express breach can impact an entire ecosystem. And then we got to think about our current employees, insider threats, former employees with access that can cause damage. And you think, well, how in the world can a former employee with access, because aren't we getting rid of those individuals that have been terminated in a timely manner? Now, here's the thing. Companies will tell you that, yes, that is our thought process, that we're going to make sure that no one's getting into our environment, especially the insiders, because we only give them least amounts of privilege. But are you monitoring that? Insider threats can be some of the most detrimental events that you will ever likely incur. And then you have your zero-day exploits. It's funny, if I had to put into categorization which one of these scares me the most, insider threats and zero-day exploits, I would go with insider threats because they already have access. They're already in your environment. A zero-day exploit, it can work if done properly, but they don't happen every day. But you have insider, employees that may not be happy who are starting to take away data, and that can happen from day one. So insider threats definitely scare me way more than anything else. And then zero day, and then supply chain, the destructive impact we can deal with if we plan correctly and properly. So here's some of the common attack vectors. So ransomware, we've heard it for years. It encrypts an organization's data and demands payment for its release. A lot of times, even if you do pay that amount of money, no matter what the request is, once you contacted your insurance company, if you have one, they still may not give you the data, or they may still put a backup link where they can come in through the back door and still start to siphon your data again. So it's really about how do you prepare yourself in the, from the way before they start, and then how do you recover from it? So if you look at third-party compromise, targeting an organization by exploiting vulnerabilities in partners, vendors, and suppliers. We've talked about this. I don't trust third-party vendors. I don't trust insider threats. I don't trust a lot of people. In looking at social engineering, right, it's so easy. If you think about MGM, that was a social engineering event. Threat actor became very lucky by getting a person who had just started like the week before of that company for MGM, and they were actually able to get that person, the threat actor, was able to get the individual in the support system the ability to actually reset the administrative password. This individual then had access to unlocking doors, reservation systems, everything. So it does happen, but with proper training, this should be alleviated fairly quickly. Insider threats, threats originating from within an organization, such as a current or former employees. And I'll tell you a quick story. I've had 3 situations in my career so far where a terminated employee still had access to data within a company for 9 months. For 9 months. And they couldn't understand why data was still going away. They couldn't tell who was logging into the system at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, because people will tell you that they are doing this on a continuous basis, but you still got to be able to prove it. If you tell me that you are looking at individuals who have been terminated in a timely manner, are you actually terminating their access across the board? Do you have a checklist? Checklist is extremely important, because if you don't have a checklist, you may forget one. It's very easy to do because of all the things that are happening. We don't have as many employees currently as resources. So now you have less people doing the same amount of work for the original amount of people that you had initially. And then vulnerability exploitation, actively scanning for and exploiting unpatched software, misconfigurations, and zero-day vulnerabilities. That's really, a self-statement. DDoS attack on Google Cloud enabled by a novel exploit of a zero-day vulnerability in the HTTP/2 protocol. So it does happen, but these are some of the common vectors that do occur. So immediate response, first critical hours, attack detection, containment, evidence preservation, stakeholder communication, and recovery planning. Believe it or not, most companies do not have this and as a plan in their environment. They have it in thought, but they don't have it written down, and they haven't tested it. There has been no tabletops that have been started, no tabletops that have been reviewed and discussed. It's just one of those things you have to do. In order for you to be ready for an emergency event, you need to practice to be ready for that emergency event. This requires you swift action as well as a balanced approach. Because if you don't have those, you don't have a call system waiting for people to jump in and off as needed to find out exactly what's going on. You've got to keep the executive team abreast. The IT team has to be really involved in the process. Your insurance carrier should definitely be involved in the process. And you may want to also have a legal team individual having those conversations as well with you, because you want to make sure you're not missing anything. And they're covering all the bases and asking the right questions of you and the team. So it's really about being prepared. If anyone on the call was a Boy Scout, we're always prepared. That is the key to being successful in life.
And one thing that we've done in a prior session, we can also send you guys a recording of it or have a private conversation, is the importance of actually a tabletop exercise, right? To sit down and actually make sure that you've got these things scripted out. You know what to do. It's like any sporting event. You have a plan before you go. The plan might change once the whistle blows, but at least you have the framework of what should be followed, who should be engaged, what should happen, what the expectations are. So you're minimizing the surprises, or you're minimizing the stress as much as possible.
I agree 100%. Thank you, sir. So critical tactics to stop the spread of cyber attacks: isolating affected systems, disconnect compromised devices. And if you have any type of MDR or EDR, it will do this automatically for you in the background. As you see, for the example, Ardent Health took its network offline and suspended user access to contain a ransomware attack. That's really the best and only way to do it. Disabling compromised accounts. If you can identify what accounts have been compromised, disable them almost immediately. And then you have network segmentation, divide networks into isolated zones to contain breaches within specific segments, and then blocking malicious traffic. Identify and block IP addresses and domains, which is why I'm a huge fan of honeypots. Um, most threat actors cannot pass up the opportunity to go for that folder that says client personal information or internal employees. They will always go for those because they see it and they think it's an easy score for them. And so they'll try to go through those. But if you create a honeypot, they basically leave all these breadcrumbs where you can actually make sure you're blocking that individual and legally as well in the future. So it's really about preparing, but also having a strategy when you are breached or when you are breached, either one of the two. Now, evidence preservation. Critical practices to maintain the integrity, document everything. It's like being at the scene of an accident. You want to document everything. Especially if you have a camera, a lot of people have now been using cameras in the cars. Oh, here's my speed. Here's what happened when I did this. Here's what the person did after that. So you document everything. So think about, this is an event where if you were in a courtroom and the lawyer's asking you questions, you want to make sure you have the right information and data points. Then secure your logs, collect and secure all relevant logs from all the servers, firewalls, everything that you can to make sure that that information can be used at a later time to find out exactly what happened and how it occurred. Creating forensic images, building or restoring systems, and make sure you have a bit for bit copy of everything, of all the hard drives and the memory affected. And then maintain a chain of custody. If it is collected, maintain a strict chain of custody to ensure its integrity and admissibility in legal proceedings if needed. Stakeholder communication. Clear, timely, and transparent communication during a crisis. Leadership in the board. Clear protocols for notifying senior leadership. And I know most of you will find this amazing, but a lot of leadership and senior leadership teams are not prepared for this. They'll ask questions, but they don't want to they don't want to get in the way. So they kind of stay out of it. They don't want to know unless something they have to make a decision on, whether it be a payment of some sort or a conversation that needs to occur to let them know exactly what's going on. But most leaderships have never really been through a tabletop. They have never been through the process in the event of a ransomware attack. And for your employees, inform employees about the situation. They're going to be concerned. A lot of times they start to panic and they say, oh, we just lost all this information and we lost all of our client data. And they start to put those on social media accounts. You want to make sure that that does not occur. If you don't tell them, people will do it. Notify if customer data has been impacted and provide information on risk. The thing that's I find very funny about this one is that Facebook gets hit so many times they've actually stopped reporting. They don't even tell people anymore. And if they do, it's going to be months later. Like, well, I expected that because it does occur. And LinkedIn, it has the same problem. So sometimes you have a company that is just, there's no way they can get around it. And they don't even try to fight it. They just want to make sure that the data stays there. But places like that, just make sure you're careful about what you're putting online as well. And then you also got to report to regulators, report incidents as required by law, and maintain regulatory compliance. And then also informing your parties, your third-party partners that have been affected, and evaluate vendor security posture, especially if the event started from them into your internal systems. So then let's talk briefly about recovery and restoration. Systematic approach to restoring systems and ensuring business continuity. So you have your initial assessment, data integrity, system restoration, and business continuity. Validating data integrity is crucial before reintroduction to production systems. Regular testing of recovery procedures ensures reliability, and a robust BCP plan is extremely important. Because if you don't have a plan, how do you know what to cut on first? What do you need to cut on second? You need to have basically a work layout of what you're going to do and who's going to be responsible for it. You have to do that. You have to test those backups, because how do you know that any of your backups are viable after an attack? How do you know that no information has been altered or changed, or where the connection points have been deviated from? So you got to make sure you're testing that consistently. If you're not doing it daily, you got to do it weekly. If you're not doing it weekly, you got to do it monthly. You got to make sure that you're doing that, because otherwise you have no idea what it looked like before. All right,
And
Chris,
Oscar,
you had a
we had
question?
we picked up a customer several months ago now, and we were talking to them. This was one of those random Sunday attacks, and they had done backups. They were encrypted and everything that you would kind of do. But what they didn't do was kind of a final step, which was make sure from an administrative standpoint that they were protected there. So the threat actor came in as an administrator and deleted all of their files. So it wasn't that they couldn't get into the files because they were encrypted. So instead of that, they just deleted everything and held the whole thing for ransom. So it is, even some of these small steps are
Mhm.
crucial in making sure that you're thinking about some of these unintended consequences, or how someone might look at it if you were trying to attack. And that's
Yeah.
where you've got to have that kind of sad perspective on some of this.
Yeah, that's a sad thing. And you hope that you can avoid those, but unfortunately, not in today's world, we can't. All right. Okay. Data recovery best practices: verifying backup integrity, prioritizing critical systems, and testing recovery procedures. This would be part of your plan. Check for corruption. This is what I was stating earlier about making sure that you're looking at your data to make sure that it's good, clean data. Because if it's not, and you reintroduce it back to a production environment, you haven't changed anything. Now you're back to where you started before. So you got to make sure you're doing the work by looking at the backups and testing those backups periodically. And you got to have a plan of attack. Otherwise, you're going to be stumped when an event does occur. And prioritize any critical systems. Progress to less essential systems, restore systems supporting core business functions, and test recovery plans regularly, and validate backup plans and their functionality. Extremely important. If you don't do this, you're already doomed to fail. Maintaining operational continuity. So activating your BCP, got to do it. Third party management, extremely important, because if your third party vendors, if they don't know what's going on, they could also be affected, and then they could actually come after you financially at a later time frame, depending on what occurs during the ransomware event. Clear communications, extremely important. If I don't give you clear communication, everything will happen, but nothing will happen. So if I have a story to tell you, you got to follow that story. But I also got to make sure that that story that I'm telling you is clear and concise. Otherwise, I'm giving you bad data, bad information that doesn't help anyone at all in this process. And also at alternative processing, establish manual workarounds and alternative processing methods to maintain critical business functions. A lot of times, because we get so comfortable with doing things, not in a manual process, everything is an automated process, that sometimes people just forget they haven't done it in a while. And so, you have to practice in order to stay good. Let's say you were a football player, you got to practice. If you don't practice, you get hurt the first game. Whose fault is it? Because you didn't practice, you weren't ready or prepared for the event that we know is coming. So it's about being able to practice it, but also prove it, doing tabletops, having the right conversations with the right group and people. Extremely important for you.
Yeah, and Oscar, on that last one, when you had the example in the top right corner with the shipping company, that was the third largest global shipper in the world. And when they were taken down, which I think lasted over a month, that was no cargo ships moved, nothing moved at customs, nothing moved in logistics, nothing moved in trucking, nothing moved anywhere. And the ripple effect of that, when you get down to kind of vendor management type stuff too, is there were a lot of these brokers that actually went out of business because they were 100% invested with that particular provider. So it'd almost be like, if all you used was FedEx, you could all of a sudden switch to UPS real quickly, or you could ship some other way. These organizations that are shipping containers don't have that flexibility that quickly. So they were locked out, lost a lot of market share, obviously, and trust. But then a lot of the brokers and the rest of the ecosystem was completely devastated as well.
Yeah, see, all it takes is one event, that can take down basically the world. That's with a backlog of 30,000 shipping containers. Nobody, yeah, you're not getting your Christmas gifts because somebody made a mistake, and that's a sad thing. But Unfortunately, it does happen on a continuous basis, and people, unfortunately haven't learned that yet. But I don't know. I think the question has to be, how much are you willing to lose in order to prove that you're ready for an event that is going to occur? Um, so let's talk briefly about post-incident improvements, transforming crisis into opportunity. And what that simply means is that, all right, so we had an issue. We've never practiced for this issue before, but we came through it with flying colors. But what did we learn? What are our lessons learned in the process that we were trying to accomplish? Did we actually get better or did we get worse? Did we do things the right way or were we way off base? So this is, you can also treat it like a learning opportunity, but you got to make sure that the people that need that learning opportunity are in the conversation. That's really important, because if you're just having a conversation with yourself, it's not going to help anyone. So that's the key. So really just making sure that you understand what happened, how it happened, what did you do right versus what did you do wrong, and what did you learn from that? Extremely important. Security enhancements, vulnerability identification, employ autonomous penetration testing for on-premise, cloud, and hybrid environments. Application security. What are we doing with it? Do we have a secure development lifecycle? Are we utilizing SaaS and DaaS? Do we have a software bill of materials for third-party components? Are we doing API security? A lot of companies are not doing that because it's either time and resource driven. And then for infrastructure security, network segmentation to contain the spread of attacks, and principle of least privilege and MFA implementation. A lot of companies still give their employees full administrative access across the board because they trust them. And listen, you should trust your employees, but you should not trust your employees. You trust them to a certain extent. You never trust them implicitly, because guess what? That is when you become susceptible. So you got to make sure that if you're going to do that, you prepare for the events that may follow. So you just got to make sure that as you take these risks, that you understand those risks could also stop your business, and you don't want that to happen, or never want that to occur. I don't wish that on my worst enemy. Well, maybe my worst enemy, but everyone outside of that.
Oscar, we only have a few minutes
Yes, sir.
left, so I don't know if I just want to kind of keep you on a closed pace anyway.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Third-party risk management, assess vendor cybersecurity posture, and require adherence to strong security standards and or frameworks. And then employee training and awareness. We've all heard it before. Regular awareness campaigns, threat-specific training, role-specific training. If you need HIPAA controls, we need to make sure that you're getting that HIPAA control training. Threat-specific, we're going to talk to them about social engineering, because this team may be responsible for bringing in money or customer service where they're getting credit card data. You want to make sure that you're preparing for them training that actually makes sense to them and they can adhere to. And then regular awareness, your standard check the box training from either Nova4 or NGO for training processes. And then incident plan, conduct a thorough postmortem, refine communication protocols, enhance response times, because sometimes we're never ready, so we don't do what we need to do in a timely manner, and test and drill regularly. I think I mentioned this before. You gotta do that part. That's extremely important to make sure you're not missing anything. So here are some of the key takeaways. Swift action is crucial and critical. Leveraging post-incident reviews. Human element is key. People are your go-to point because they see things before you will, or discover them. Methodical recovery. If we're going to recover something, it has to make sense in how we're doing it and what is the time frame for us doing it, but also continuous improvement. I think that goes without being spoken about. An interconnected nature. Business continuity are intertwined, but also your business groups and your senior leadership team can provide a lot of approaches on how things can be done and what needs to be done. But that's only because you train them properly. If you haven't done that, then you're probably going to have a longer conversation. So, Chris, I will give this back over to you, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully we covered a lot of information for you. And like I said, you can start this timeline anywhere you want to have even a 2-hour conversation on the topic. We're going to send out a recording of this. We'll send out the slides. I'll try to send out some preliminary information as well, like importance of an assessment, cyber insurance. I mean, I think one of the easiest things might be for each of you to reach out and respond to my email if in fact you'd like more information specifically, or you can go to our YouTube site, which will be in the link as well, to go look for all these other recordings. But the most important part is to really be ready, to be prepared, to know where you are, know what your risk is, and elevate that up to leadership to have them understand, where you are in the process and what really needs to be done to be able to both protect yourself and recover if necessary. So really want to thank everybody for attending. Oscar, thank you so much for your time and your insight. And like I said, we'll get this information off to everybody and have a great week. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.